Hello, Soundies. Welcome to our Sound for Video session. Today is the 2nd of February, 2025. It's great to have you all here. Let's jump directly over to our agenda here. Today is pretty straightforward. As always, this is a workshop which goes along with our courses at school.learnlightandsound.com, and it's a question and answer session today, although I do have some things that I got prepped to answer some of the questions ahead of time, so thanks to those who submitted their questions up front. Hope you had a great week, by the way, that you learned something as it relates to sound in some fashion. It puts you in a better position to make better sound for your projects, whatever those may be. So let's jump directly into the questions. The first one up is here from, and I apologize, I don't know if you say Bart. I'm not sure how I apologize in advance. But I have recently completed the sound mix on a feature film. I normalized this mix to minus 27 LUFS for theatrical screening, and it sounded fantastic in the local church we were using as the auditorium. There is a high dynamic range in the movie, from ambient sounds, birdsong, distant traffic, etc., to the loudest effects, a couple of which peaked at minus 2 dB. I now plan to upload this movie to YouTube, and the question I have is, should I just allow YouTube to apply its own compression to the mix, or should I remix it and apply compression myself in an attempt to get near to their standard? If the latter, what pitfalls should I avoid? Should I just boost the dialogue, or should everything be louder? Okay, it is a fantastic question. I would, as an experiment, I think what I would probably do is upload it to YouTube and set the video to private so nobody else can watch it, just you. And then I would check to see if YouTube enables for that video their stable volume feature. I have noticed that for those that are not familiar with a stable volume feature, the problem that YouTube is trying to solve with that feature is a lot of people don't know the first thing about audio, and so they upload videos to YouTube. They don't do anything to their audio. They don't know what to do with their audio, and that's the reality. And so you'll be watching videos, and one will be super quiet, and the next one will be super ridiculously loud, and you're kind of diving for the volume control in between each video. So in YouTube's effort to ensure that viewers stay on the site longer, they've created this stable volume feature. And the idea with the stable volume feature is that if something comes in really, really quiet, it actually boosts it up. It applies some compression as necessary and boosts it up so that it sits closer to the louder videos. And of course, nothing is allowed to go louder than minus 14 LUFS for the entire video. So if something is uploaded and it's louder than that, YouTube will actually reduce its overall volume. So that's the context. I would actually check to see if it even turns that feature on. I've noticed on some of my videos, a number of my videos actually, that YouTube doesn't even give it the option for people to use stable volume. And that's even when I've normalized to minus 23, or in some cases minus maybe 17. So it seems a little bit, I don't know it seems like there's another algorithm that's deciding, okay, well, we'll apply stable volume here, because I think the stable volume has to do some calculations ahead of time, is my guess. Not positive, but I think it has to do calculations ahead of time to figure out how it wants to achieve that stable volume for that video, but it doesn't apply it to all videos. So that's the first thing I do, check to see if it'll even enable that for that video. And if it does, listen to it. And you are the mixer, you're the post mixer, so you're the artist. You get to decide, is that the experience I want my audience to have? And if it's not, if it sounds really messed up and you want to change the mix, then I would consider doing a mix. And I think the main thing is that for online streaming platforms like YouTube, the type of thing, and for podcasts, and the type of thing where people are listening in less than ideal listening environments with less than ideal, either phone speakers or earbuds or whatever the case may be, it's important to reduce the overall loudness range. That's kind of the biggest thing. And once you've done that, you can usually get it boosted up to a, minus 14 LUFS if you wanted to target that for YouTube. I would probably, personally, I prefer to have a little bit more loudness range than that, so I would probably target something more like minus 17, but that's a personal question or personal decision. So if it does, So if you decide to do a mix, I think pitfalls to avoid is I wouldn't just apply a compressor across the mix bus. I mean, you could do that and perhaps achieve it, but I think that's going to end up doing the same thing that YouTube stable volume does, most likely. And I wouldn't just boost the dialogue either. I would probably just do a new mix. I would create copy that project or duplicate that project and create a brand new mix that is optimized. So with a lot less loudness range and that sits overall louder on the outputs. So something, again, closer to minus 17 is what I would target. What I mean by that, what the kind of people's, sometimes when I say things like that, people's still have a lot of questions. And let me clarify. You want to get the relative levels of the different elements of your mix to a point where they're presented to the audience in the way you want it presented to the audience. So high dynamic range is not an option if you're going to target minus 17 or minus 14 LUFS. You're going to have to compress that loudness range some. And so what that means in practical terms is you're probably going to need to bring the bird song and the distant traffic up a little bit, possibly. I don't know. Those are the decisions, the mixed decisions that you have to make to create the experience that you want for your audience. So making sure that they can hear the things you need them to hear that are important to the story and important to the overall sound design, and prioritizing those things that they absolutely have to hear. So obviously dialogue, for example, is a great example of that. So hopefully that helps a little bit. That's a great question. I wish you all the best in making that decision and making a new mix if that's what you decide to do. So thanks for the question there. All right, next question. What is a slate microphone and what is it used for? Now, this is a question that actually came to me some months ago, and I apologize, I don't remember who sent it to me, but it's a great question that we haven't covered in a lot of detail yet. So let's take a look. Let's switch to our overhead camera here where I have a Sound Devices MixPre 10 set up. And the idea with a slate microphone, I've generally seen it used in one of two circumstances. One, for slating, and I'll come back to that in just a second. And number two, as a kind of very convenient, although not necessarily the highest quality, comms microphone. So for the mixer to be able to communicate with their team, with the boom operator and the utility sound technician. So it can be used for one of those two things. It's not really practical under most circumstances to use an inbuilt slate mic, this is what you see right here. It's hard to see there in the light. See those three little dots there? I think that's where the slate microphone is positioned in the MixPre 10. And let's go back to the slate. So let's go to the slate use case. If I am a location sound mixer and I'm doing everything, I've got the bag, I'm wearing it with a harness on my person, I've got the boom pole, I'm booming the mic, I'm doing everything, and there's a very, very small crew. Maybe there's no AD, who is typically one of the people, or it's second AD, depending on the production, that does the slating, that actually holds the slate up and calls the whole thing out. If we're working on a much smaller production, maybe there's just a camera operator and there's me. And I've worked on those kind of productions before. And in those cases, sometimes you don't have someone to do the slate. So what do? Well, one option is you can actually call out the slate. So they can put it on camera. They can put the slate on camera, and you can actually call it out from your mixer without having to kind of finagle the boom microphone over you. You can actually just enable the slate mic and call out, the take and so on and so forth, right from the mixer here. And so it's essentially an extra microphone right on the mixer. The MixPre 10T, the MixPre 10.2 has it. I don't believe that the 6 or the 3 have it. I think, one second. I think that the Zoom F8N Pro might have it. I need to double check that, but there's nothing magical about having a built-in microphone except that it's convenient. You can actually use one of the inputs on your mixer as a slate mic. But here's the idea. So when I'm ready to call slate, I can set it up so that I can just, in this case, move that switch. And notice as I'm talking here, this slate mic is picking up. So I would call out, this is scene 3, take 2, marker, and then maybe the camera operator would operate the slate, and then you would go from there. So, and then as soon as I'm done calling out the slate, I can turn that slate mic back off again. So that's an example of what a slate mic is used for, one option at least. In terms of setting it up on the Mix Pre, what we would do is come into the menus here. There's actually a tone slate menu. Here's where you can turn this. If you want to go in the menu and turn it on and off, you can do that right here. So now it's actually on, and you can see that because all of these turn green. So it's picking me up as I talk on the slate mic. The other thing that you have in this menu is the gain for the slate mic. So you can set the gain up to, I think, 50 dB for the built-in slate mic. We found that for where we were positioned, 30 dB was about right. So we'll go with 30 dB. The other thing I noticed that's necessary too is if you come into the menu, you do have to come into the inputs. And for the aux in mode, you have to select mic. If that's not on, then the slate mic won't work. So just so that you're aware there. And that doesn't mean you can't use the aux in for another source of sound. It just means that when you turn the slate mic on, the aux, whatever is connected to the aux in, is essentially muted while you use the slate mic. And then as soon as you're done using the slate mic, the aux in then goes to its own channel, whether that's 9 and 10 or whatever you have it routed to. All right, now, in addition to that, there is also some routing you can set up. And in fact, if we go back into the tone slate mic menu, and we can come into the slate routing. And right now you can see I have the slate mic routed to every single possible channel in the Mix Pre 10. So I've got it in inputs 1 through 8. I've got it in the 9 and 10, which is the aux 3.5 millimeter input. I've got the right and left mix, or left and right mix. And then I've also got it routed to all of the outputs. So that's going to be the X1, X2 output on the left-hand side, plus the 2 XLR outputs on the right-hand side. So everything is getting the slate mic the way it's set up right now. Now, that's important to understand that, because if you decide instead, so that's slate mic, that's what you would normally use if you're using it for slating. Now, if you wanted to use it as a comms mic instead, you could do that as well. Now, the idea with a comms mic is I have a team. It's me as a mixer. I have a boom operator, and I have a utility sound technician. And I want to be able to communicate to my people without it necessarily getting recorded to the recorder, or anyone else that's listening in, anyone else that I'm sending a feed of audio to. I don't necessarily want them to get it either. So if I'm sending audio to the director or audio to the script supervisor, they're not going to necessarily want to hear all the chatter from me and my team, or the things that I'm whispering to my team. Like, hey, it sounds like we lost the lav mic on such and such actor. Let's, between next take, please get that battery swapped out or check that out. Those kind of things that you would normally do over a communication system. So the idea here then is you could set up the comms mic instead just to be used for that situation. And the way you could do that is you would just adjust the routing for the slate mic. So we're going to come back into this tone slate menu. Going to the second page here, we're going to go to slate routing. Now in this case, I might be, let's say I have a comm tech. So I've just got to, just so you see what that's about. So we've talked about these before. This is the comm tech transmitter, and then I've got a couple of receivers, so one for each member of the team. And what I could do is connect the X1, X2 output, which is this little 3.5 millimeter output over here on the left side. Connect that into the CommTech transmitter. Okay, so now I'm using X1, X2 as a way to communicate with my team. And so what that means in practical terms is I want to route the slate mic so that it only goes to the CommTech and nowhere else. And so what that means is I would come through here and turn off all the channels I didn't want to send the my communication to. Whoops. Having trouble selecting 2. Oh no, I got it that time. There's 4, 5. So these are all mics that I'm using presumably for the production. And let's see here. Yep, I want to turn all of these off, so I don't want to record them. I don't want anyone else to hear them. Turning out, I don't want to send it to the left mix or the right mix. Okay, now all I have left is selected as X1, X2. So That's all I'm sending. When I engage this slate mic, you'll notice slate mic is on, but it's only going to X1, X2, and we don't even have a meter for X1, X2. So that is how I could set it up. So now when I'm done talking to my team, I turn the slate mic back off and we're back to normal. So that's one thing I could do. Now I could also, in that X1 to X2, I can also still route other things. So for example, if we just go to our output routing, and let's say I am using the X1, X2, which is I think going to be on the next page. Yep, there it is. So let's say on the X1 output, I can still send the left mix to them as well on that X1 output. So they're getting the full mix plus they're getting my slate mic, but nobody else is getting my slate mic. So that's an example of how you might set that up. And actually I jumped ahead. If we go back to the agenda, got ahead of myself. So we talked about a slate mic and we also talked about comms and how we set them up. So that's one way to set them up. That's just one unidirectional comms, by the way. I could also have a transmitter on each of my team members that would be transmitting back to the mixer, and I would use an input for each of them so that I could hear them back as well if we needed to communicate two-way. But just a very simple way is the way I talked about, where we just have one-way communication from me, the mixer, out to the rest of the team. Okay, let's pause there. Let's go to the chat and see what other questions we have in the chat or other stories you can tell us about your experiences over the last week or two. Maybe problems you encountered, maybe things you learned. Geekcom World, stable volume is an option, but grayed out, so I cannot enable for this YouTube video. I am on free YouTube, not premium, on my cell. I'm on my premium and it's grayed out as well. Yeah, it's kind of hit and miss, and I don't understand when it's enabled and when it's not. Da Vinci Girl says the stable audio feature was turned on with my Bluetooth headset. Let me not hear any difference last week. Okay. I just scored an internship at my college in AV. I'm learning the Behringer X32 board. Any best practices for me to follow? Soon I'll be working on the ATEM Extreme video switcher best practices. I think that to me, there are some things that I impose as rules for myself. And my overarching approach is, when you're getting started, the number one thing you need to do is create a sane environment for yourself to work in. Things need to be where you expect them to be. They need to be set the way you expect them to be set. And you need to turn off things that could potentially create problems. So along those lines, let me get a sip of water here, just one second. So along those lines, a few things that I would suggest. Number one, if you don't have a pre-show or a show prep checklist, make one. And on that list, you need to list all of the things that you need to bring to the location where you're doing the show. Or even if it's in an installation kind of scenario where you're maybe in a theater and everything's already there, still have a checklist to check all the important things. So you're going to be checking cables, you're going to be checking wireless, you're going to be checking batteries, you're going to be checking all those things. So have a checklist so ahead of time you can come 100% prepared so that there are no surprises when you get into the show. Number two, you have to do checks and tests. I would do tests before the artists arrive, and then I would do a sound check when the artists are there as well. When those artists get there, you should be 90-some% of the way ready. I mean, you should have, at that point, you're just going to be dialing in and solving hopefully little problems at that point. Maybe if there's any feedback in the space or anything like that. I don't know if you're doing live or exactly what you're doing, but that's another thing. Another thing, if we switch back to the overhead camera here really quick, this is actually a little atypical for me. You will notice all the faders are down for these channels that I'm not using. Let's hop back out. A lot of times I get more aggressive than that, and I will actually mute the channels that I'm not using intentionally. And even though they're already disabled, you can actually, on the mix pre, you can also mute them. The nice thing about that is that you'll notice you get these red rings around each of the channels that's muted. So I know at a glance that these are not feeding the mix right now. That's an example of the type of thing where I have my own system for doing things that just gives me peace of mind and helps me solve problems faster. So that's another suggestion that I have for you. I would also get to know the X32 Air. I believe you're controlling all that via tablet. You're going to need to make sure that you're going to have power that will sustain you through the entire production. Tablets, maybe some are better than others. I have an iPad Pro, and that thing, it just burns through its battery. It does not. I think if I've got the screen on the entire time, I don't know if I'd be able to get 2 hours of full time. So having a charging plan or like a topping it off kind of plan is really important as well. So if anyone else has other suggestions, please drop them in the chat. Always happy for this community to share and help each other. But those are some of my thoughts on how to come prepared and tips and tricks. It appears your mic is clipping on the mix pre. Well, let's go back and take a look, Brian. It looks like my mic may be clipping on the mix pre. Good thing. This is, by the way, this is not the audio you're hearing right here. This microphone is sitting a good distance away from me. I would probably gain closer to here. Let's see where that gets us. Checking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Even that's still maybe a little hot, but yeah, thanks for the note there. That mic is just there so that we have a meter, something to look at. This is a completely different, what you're hearing is a completely different system. Oh, good. Corey confirms that the F8 has it. Yes, meaning a slate mic, I assume. So yeah, that's great news. Mark says, for voiceover sessions, I will use the slate mic as a talkback rather than taking up an input. That's another great example of where you could use the slate mic. So as you're engineering the voiceover session, that allows you to talk with the voiceover artist, I assume. Corey says, I was on the production where my boom op and I solely communicated through him talking on boom and me talking through slate. That's another great example. Yeah, the boom op doesn't necessarily have to have another transmitter. They can just talk through the boom. The only problem with that is that when they do that, unless you have your mixer set up so that when you're not rolling, the boom mic is only routed to the production mixer, that the other people that you are sending a feed to will hear whatever's being said there. So just something to be aware of. But yeah, that can totally work too. I've heard of that kind of setup before. Matt says, for my few video projects, the director assistant did the slate, and we just put a DJI mic, and I brought it into the mix pre because all the other lav were track E. We also had 416s as shotguns, no comms. Yeah, it depends on the production as to whether or not you have comms. Comms is, I would say comms is more. I've never used comms. I've never had my own boom operator. So I want to make it clear, I am not a comms setup expert, but they're usually used on larger budget productions where the risk of missing something or not being able to communicate is higher. In other words, you'll have a bigger impact to the overall production if you don't have that ability to communicate. So that's where you're more likely to see comms. They have a larger budget where they can mitigate those kinds of risks. Daniel confirms there's a slate mic on my F8N Pro. So yes, confirmed that the F8N Pro does have a slate mic. And the setup is going to be very similar to that. Chuck Mason has a best practice: list out single point of failures and actions to fix. That's a great idea. So if you kind of follow through your entire signal chain from microphone all the way through to the recorder, you can find potential single points of failure. A great example of that is cables can be single points of failure and often are. So that's one thing. If a transmitter's battery runs out, that's a single point of failure. You have to have a plan in place ready to do that. A lot of times you'll see the production carts. There's actually usually a utility cart and a mixer cart on the bigger productions, and the utility cart will have a whole bunch of batteries, and in fact, in many cases, they will become the source of batteries for the entire production. So the sound department becomes a little bit more critical yet another way. So that's something to consider. Danny has something to say.
I would add, be ready for anything from the people who you're reinforcing the sound.
Oh, yeah. If you're doing live sound as well, be ready for any sort of request that could come from the live sound people.
Or situation.
Or any, kind of situation. We've had, we were actually at Danny did a show a while back in December, and
2015. 2015? No. Oh,
in December,
year.
2024. And your accompanist showed up, and for whatever reason, the pickup in his guitar wasn't working with the sound system that was set up. So there was some troubleshooting that had to take place there, and ended up miking the guitar. Be ready to solve those problems. That is great advice, too, by the way. Identify the single points of failure and have a plan for how to address them. So you will probably find that you bring a lot more stuff to the productions than you might have initially thought. Does the Mix Pre 6 have a slate mic? Chuck, no, it does not. The 3 and the 6 do not, just the 10 does. Matt says, my wife complains that even though I'm retired, we're still early to everything. I always get there early because being rushed equals mistakes. That's also fantastic advice. And when you're working on a production, usually you'll get a call sheet with the time listed at what time, when you should be there. I usually try to be there substantially before that in as much as possible, because I usually have questions myself that I want to answer for myself, like get the lay of the land, understand. Like if I wasn't on the location scout, for example, I want to see what the location is. I want to understand what's going on there. Kind of map out my options based on where we're going to be filming. Usually the director's already there. They may or may not have time to talk to you and answer a lot of questions, but at least you can start to formulate what the questions are and start to get set up and be completely ready to go. Mark says, one thing I've always done for my cameras, mixer, recorder, and any other software is a backup of all the device software that is, I assume SW software that is readily available, especially for shared gear. Back up all of the device SW. I'm trying to picture what that means exactly, Mark.
So you can reinstall it if it gets messed up.
So you can reinstall if you need to? Okay. Yeah, that's another good example, I think. Actions to fix includes a FUBAR bag of stuff. I call it a utility bag rather than a FUBAR bag, but yeah, having a bag full of little problem solvers is you'll find that you accumulate those, and it's better to accumulate them and have them with you before you need them in as much as possible. Tape, lots of tape. Software, okay, very good. Makes sense. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, it's good advice there. Chuck said, I had a foreign symphony string player need a cloth to clean a very expensive instrument. This was before microfiber cloths. My t-shirt did the job. So
Cotton is the best.
that
anyway.
is, and cotton is the best, Danny says, as a violin player. That is a fantastic example. You took the shirt literally off your back to help the artist. That's a perfect example. Configurations. Okay, so when I see what you're saying now, Mark. You get everything configured and set up before the show just the way you want it, and then you make a backup of that configuration so that you can restore it in case things start going funky once you get there. That is great advice as well. Completely agree. All right. That's everything in the chat, is it? Okay. Well, I guess we're done. I didn't have anything else. I ended up working on, let me just tell you about the recent video I posted. We just posted a video review of the Tascam DR07 XP on our main channel, and I ended up working on that video until late into the night last night, so I didn't have time to prepare more for today's, but I did want to show the Slate and Comms. That's one that's been on the list for a while. In any case, if you are interested in little handheld field recorders, this is not a bad one, and it does the job. I've had something on my mind quite a lot lately, actually. The kind of the new features on this one are, first of all, a USB-C port, and then it does 32-bit float recording. Those are kind of the new things on this new version. So the XP is the latest version. There was an X version prior to this, and then there was the original DR07 version prior to that. I've been thinking a lot about 32-bit float, and as I think about it, and I've talked to colleagues, professionals working in audio, and I've asked them, hey, how critical is 32-bit float to your workflow, and how often do you use it? And their answers, of course, span a range, but the majority of them will say either I'd never use it, or because if you're working on a big production, a lot of times the post team is not set up or not prepared to get 32-bit float, and they don't want it, they don't need it. In fact, and when I say they don't want it, the reason I say that is that if the audio exceeds 0 dB, then that's an additional task for them to take care of. They want the production sound mixer to take care of that for them, as they always have, which is don't give us clipped audio. Or don't give us audio that goes above 0 dB. So that you would be handing off a task to the post team that they, in a bigger production, they don't actually own that. It's not their responsibility to do that. That is the production team's job. So that's the first thing. Second is, the second answer that I hear from them is, every once in a really long while I'll use it. So, I've heard a number of people who maybe are hobbyists or somebody that's shooting something that they only get one shot at. They may say, well, I'll turn 32-bit float on if I'm at an air show and there's going to be an SR-71's going to do a flyby, and I don't have an opportunity to set gain ahead of time. I don't know what it's going to be. That makes sense. But there are relatively few that professional audio people have cases. Now, the other case is solo operators, people that are operating camera and everything else, and they're doing craft services, feeding the crew, directing everything. And we laugh, but that's actually a real thing. That actually happens. And yeah, that's a lot to handle. But I find even in those situations, I don't do it. I don't use 32-bit float. I'm still using 24-bit. But I think the big secret is, I feel like it's a tool that is useful in a very small number of cases, but that when it was marketed by some of the companies that introduced it, it was marketed as, you'll never have to worry about setting gain ever again. And I think that's a little bit of a mistake, because if you rely on it as a crutch that way, then you're just pushing more work to yourself later on, when in fact you could have done one simple thing. If we go back to the overhead camera, and Brian, you called it out, a lot of times on these higher quality audio recorders, you don't need to push the gain. You don't need the levels to be topping out at minus 12. In fact, we're still a little hot here. I could still come down some more. If I pop back out here, even here is a really comfortable range. These preamplifiers are clean. The converters are clean in 24-bit mode. Leave more headroom. I think a lot of people could just benefit from leaving more headroom. Quit trying to follow the YouTubers who advised, including myself back in the day, that advised, try to hit your peaks around minus 12. Absolutely no higher than minus 6. That's not necessary. When you're doing production sound, for a non-live event, you're recording, there is no need to push the levels that hot. You can definitely back off and leave yourself plenty of headroom. And if things get really wild, the mix pre still has a limiter, and that's probably going to be just fine. So that's one thought that I have. It's not that I'm not here to say that 32-bit float is horrible and you should never ever consider even the possibility of using it. I'm not saying that, but I think in a lot of cases, I have a hypothesis. But before we do that, Danny has a note.
We're getting more comments.
Okay,
So wrap it up.
back to the chat.
Wrap it up.
Yeah, no, let's go back to the chat, and I'll come back
Okay, we
to
have more
32-bit
comments on
float.
Best practices.
Best practices, great. Love to see these. Mark, for live broadcast, never trust the camera ops to set up their own audio. That's good advice. Very good advice. And I assume, Mark, you're probably sending them a wireless feed or a feed of some sort, and you got to help them calibrate their levels amongst other things. But yeah, definitely good advice. Bankbuster Productions, regarding checklists, these should be written rather than mental checklists. Absolutely, 100%. When the pressure is on, the ladder tends to evaporate. 100% agree. It should not be something in your brain. It should be something written down somewhere that you can literally check off. Rag and Bone Puppet Theater says, regarding prep, as a touring theater, I have a manifest of all the items we need to pack, and I update it frequently. That's a perfect example. Having a manifest of all the things that you have to have packed. I learned this lesson the really hard way when I did one of my very first location jobs. I completely forgot to bring the lavalier hiding kit. Just slipped my mind. Fortunately, in that case, the stakes were pretty low, and we just boomed the whole thing, which was fine. But you never, when you're getting, and I wasn't getting paid. This was just a little weekend passion project for somebody. So they were still happy with the results. But if you're getting paid, you never want to be in that situation. So having a manifest is the way. Audio Buff says, in live audio, strive to know your equipment inside and out. Familiarity calms. That is so true as well. You need to know your mixer. You need to know your wireless. You need to know, your microphones, everything, all your cables. You need to know it in and out. So that you're right. I can now go into a production job. I feel so much less stress coming in, and that puts me in a better position to solve problems and actually help out on. I'm not working on huge productions, but I can help out with other things on the set too. Robert says, I'm now in the difficult phase of checklists, using them every time. Still working on this and failing sometimes. It's think of it this way if it helps. If it's good enough for an airplane pilot to have a pre-flight checklist, it's good enough for us.
Okay. Just remind people how to ask questions.
Open topics. Yes. So if you have a question, go ahead and tag it with @CurtisJuddAudio. That'll alert Danny to put it up on the screen, and we'll definitely talk about it. So if you have other topics you want to cover, by all means, bring them in. All right, Matt, question. So I'm close to getting my Lewitt LCT 1040. Do you want to review it first? I would be delighted to, Matt. I would love to do that. Absolutely. I'm happy to write a letter of recommendation if you'd like, but congratulations. That sounds very exciting and a lot of fun. Corey, I've only used 32-bit float only for Foley work, just grabbing wild sounds, gunshots for sure if I'm putting my mics through that business. See, that seems very in line with most of the other pros that I've talked to as well. Matt Degnan, 2448 is our standard. So 24-bit, 48 kilohertz is our standard for certainly for capturing dialogue. Yeah. When we go to sound effects, I do think there's value in going to 96 kilohertz. A lot of times sound effects get a lot more heavily processed, and having 96, if the post team wants that. But yeah, sometimes with sound effects, I'll go up to 96 kilohertz. Robert says, I recall an important feature of the Mix Pre is that they have analog limiters. Am I correct? That is correct. I believe they're optical analog limiters. So they sound fairly transparent. No limiter is perfectly transparent, especially if you're pushing it really, really hard. But if you leave yourself plenty of headroom, again, like we said here, I would, I think a lot of production sound mixers are targeting like -24 to -18 on the meters. If you leave yourself enough headroom, typically those limiters, when they do engage, will sound fairly transparent because they're just doing a little bit of, just a touch of managing as transient there. Chuck says, gig this summer in the UK, iPhone 16 Pro Max, have to get a Sennheiser 416 to work for audio, use a Mix Pre and feed the phone through a hub? ? I don't know. I've never done that workflow, so I would definitely do some testing ahead of time. But in theory, it should work. The Mix Pre can send a stereo mix to the phone, so you should be able to do that. You'll be tethered. I don't know what the rig is going to look like, the camera rig, but it will be potentially tethered. And I assume, I don't know if you're going to be booming the 416 or you're going to be attaching that to the camera rig, but just some practical things I would work out as well. But yeah, definitely do testing, test. And if it's a hub, I don't know does it need to be a hub? I think you can go straight from the mix pre into the phone. But yeah, again, this is a perfect example of where you need to test it all out ahead of time so that you know going into the first production day exactly what to expect, exactly how to have everything set up, and you're ready to go. Chuck, handling students' recording gear on an handing students recording gear on an archaeology dig. 32-bit is more user-proof from novices. That's a fair use case, yeah.
Best practices.
Best practices, network of friends to ask for help when you forget something, yeah. Hey, can you please go get a blah, blah, blah and bring it to, yeah, exactly. That's another good point, Chuck. Practice, practice, practice. Could not agree more. I also appreciate this community has been really helpful for me in terms of identifying things that I hadn't thought of. So being a part of a community of some sort like this one can be really, really helpful for those circumstances where we can share stories about what happened on different productions, lessons we've learned, how we've solved different problems. And those are all things that we can all learn and kind of share with each other. All right, cacophonous question. Odd one for you. Any advice on equipment or best practices for recording audio, video in potentially dangerous situations, especially when you interview the general public? Small and light, so that you can get out if you have to. There's even, I have some reservations about this, but there are plug-on transmitters that are also recorders that you could use. So if you're doing an interview mic, having something like that, you have no cables. You literally have a recorder on the bottom of the mic, so you've got your other hand free, and you've got the mic all set up and recording there. I think that's a great example of at least an audio kit that could be very, very lightweight and keep you nimble enough to adapt to very dangerous situations. Camera, same thing applies there. Keep it small. Keep it nimble. Fewer parts, the better. Yeah, it's also less intrusive. And so I think that's always better for interviews, having something that's not super big and super intrusive and super impressive looking. Less impressive, the better looking. A great pair of running shoes, Mark. That's good. That's good advice as well. Yeah, being comfortable and being able to, especially if you've got to adapt fast. Not that I've been in these circumstances. That's just how I would approach it. Rode has that new interview mic that has internal recording. Yeah, the only reservation I have about that is the built-in battery. So if it'll take you only so far. If you need to charge throughout the day, then you're gonna have to find some way to charge it. So that's a downside of that one. But yeah, that one came to mind as well, Matt. Mark, just getting the camera op to make sure 48 volt is on for their shotgun can be challenging. The last thing I want is I want to hear is telling over comms that they can't hear camera 4. Yeah, I agree. And I think a lot of times the camera operators will appreciate it as well. Appreciate the help that you can give them. So, and it's not hard to approach them and say, hey, we're not getting any audio from you. Can I help you out here? And let's get this thing up and running. Victor, is there any benefit in adding a hardware compressor normalizer to reduce post work? I'll be speaking and recording on a Mix Pre 6 at a conference and will need to distribute someday.
Same day.
Oh, sorry, same day. Well, yes, in broadcast, they've used hardware processors for a very long time. You can do it in software as well. And so, yeah, there definitely is a benefit to that. But what I would say is that the stakes are a little higher when you're doing it live, because if you have the compressor set the wrong way, it could mangle the audio, or make it sound less than optimal. So, yeah, absolutely. But do a lot of testing and make sure you have it dialed in. And that testing, the trick with that is that the testing, you need to actually do it for example, if you're presenting in a live auditorium, you've got a lot of room ambiance. So when you compress, you're reducing the overall loudness range, that means that the noise floor is going to be sitting closer to the, the material that the spoken word, presumably. So you just need to, just do a lot of testing. I think it absolutely is useful. We do it on our live streams. We have a compressor, a noise gate, and I don't know if we have any EQ on right now. Let's check. We just have a high pass filter on right now, but that's all we're doing right now. But yeah, for live events, absolutely can be helpful. Rag and Bone Puppet Theater. Odd connectors can be useful. Once had a camera for onstage video stolen from backstage. My what if brain had packed an iPhone HDMI adapter in case the camera failed. Very good. Yeah, that's a great example of being prepared. So you had a backup. Camera was stolen, which is tragic and sad. But you had a way to manage that with an iPhone and an HDMI adapter. Perfect example, being prepared. Identifying single points of failure, camera, and having a backup plan. HDMI adapter and an iPhone. Perfect. All right. Question. Lavaliers have different connectors. Should I get the small TQG or a mini jack TRS? Want to record to my MixPre 6. Well, DPA microphones just came out with a new universal connector type that's worth looking into. I don't know anything other than the marketing materials I've seen about it, but traditionally, lavaliers, you could in some cases buy them with, what was the name of that universal connector? Microdot, I think it was Microdot. And Microdot was good from the standpoint that you could adapt that lavalier to work with almost any device. The problem with it was it wasn't terribly robust. They would break. DPA has created a new one that appears to be a little bit more robust. I don't remember what they're calling theirs, but that's worth looking into. Otherwise, what's the small TQG? I'm not sure what that means. Is that like a... Yeah, I'm not sure what that means. But if you're always going to be using it with your MixPre, then yeah, you could get a 3.5 millimeter or you could get an XLR termination on it. Either one should be fine. But if you want the flexibility of being able to switch out that connector in the future, potentially for a different type of connector for a wireless system, for example, you might look into the not Microdot, but the new DPA version, whatever it's called. Chuck, speaking of stuff being stolen, what do you use for insurance? I'm going to let the community answer that. I have a insurance policy through the same company that provides our home insurance, auto insurance, so on and so forth. They call it a Marine Midland, I think, a Marine something policy, but it's an add-on to our overall policy. In our case, we're going through State Farm, and it insures all of the equipment from loss or if it's been stolen or if it just, yeah. So that's what I'm using. I don't do a lot of location work at this point anymore, so that's less relevant for me than it used to be, but there are other options out there as well. Love to hear from the community what people are using. Victor, can you recommend a fairly portable compressor? Let's see. Whoops. Well, there are podcast recorders like the Mackie DLZ XS, which is a 2-input mixer recorder. There are, Mackie just released also a new, what's it called? Let's actually look it up. They actually offered to send me one for review, and I haven't looked at it closely enough yet. Mac, can I type? I can type. Okay, let's go to the Mac here. And let's take a look at our... think the Pro FX10 Go is the new one here. It's not tiny. I think this is like a 4 XLR input, but it can be battery powered as well. And it does have just like a one knob compressor, which is actually probably good. It's a pretty simple compressor to set up. That's an option. As I mentioned before, there was the DLZ Creator XS is a smaller version. It has a full compressor, noise gate, EQ, de-esser. It's a digital mixer, so it's not an analog mixer. But that should have everything that you would need there. That's another option too. Rode, of course, makes the Rodecaster Pro 2 and the Rodecaster Duo. The Duo is a smaller version, so it's basically Rode's version of this. That's another option as well. There may be other options out there that are fully just like an analog piece of gear as well. I'm not as familiar with that world, but all the ones that I know about are all rack mount, which I think is what you're trying to avoid. So, Victor Malkin, just think live recording and process everything. Back in the day, we had 286 on every lav in the rack. So by 286, I assume, Matt, you're referring to the DBX 286S, which is basically a vocal channel strip with a compressor, a de-esser, enhancer, and expander. TQG is a mini XLR. It's what Shure uses on their body packs. Okay, got it. Yeah, if you're going into the mix pre, then you wouldn't want that. Mark Holloway, look for this. Ambient EMP 3.5 48 volt electric converter, 3.5 millimeter TRS female to 3-pin XLR male. That's, there's another good one that you could use as well. So if you wanted to get the 3.5 millimeter microphone, the 3.5 millimeter connector version of that lavalier, whatever lavalier you're using, then you could use the ambient converter there to get it into an XLR input. And what it does is it takes the phantom voltage and converts it down to the 3 to 5 volts that the lavalier needs.
I think this is
Rode has one as well.
I think this is insurance.
Insurance, sure. Inland Marine. Thank you, Linda. I think you're right.
Okay.
Yep. Mark, more advice. Gaffer tape. Tape fixes everything almost. Always carry a roll of console tape and label everything. Yeah, if you don't have like a digital scribble strip to identify all of the inputs, then you should definitely have the tape that you can put on the mixer. The older analog mixers, that's actually I learned on an old analog Mackie mixer, and we had the scribble tape that we put down before every act. And then you can use a pen to write, okay, channel 1 is blah, blah, blah. Channel 2 is this. Channel 3 is that. Channel 4 is this. So that's another thing that's a great advice. Make sure you know very clearly what everything is. Mark it. Make it clear to yourself so that when you're in this really stressful, I've got to solve this problem kind of situation, all of that is crystal clear. You're not having to jog your memory and be like, okay, what's on channel 3? You should never have to do that. And most of the digital mixers have that you can do digitally on them. When we do big live events, we have spare parts for every part of the signal chain, from speakers to mixing consoles. We have a backup. We've got one chance to get it right. Yeah, that's very good advice. And in fact, even for like location and production sound jobs, I will take my 888 as my primary mixer, and I'll have a Mix Pre 10 as my backup mixer. And there actually was one job for American Chopper. I helped film one episode of American Chopper, and we had to fall back to the Mix Pre. Long story, but at the time I was recording, my primary mixer was a 633. And we had additional people show up. So I needed more channels. In the 633, I didn't have enough channels, so we went over to the Mix Pre 10. That's one example. Chuck, I label each cable for purpose and where necessary what each end is for. That's a good one as well. We actually, another thing that we did for live shows is when we had when it was more like a music festival and you had act after act after act coming up on stage, we would actually identify the microphones by putting rings of tape on the microphone stands, so we knew exactly which microphone that was, because music festivals are just pure chaos. You get another act up on the stage, at least at the lower level. The bigger ones, obviously, it's a different story, but where you get a bunch of volunteer acts up on stage one after the other, even if they're professional acts, things just get chaotic. And so having each of the microphones marked and what we did is, I think in our case, we only had a couple of colors of tape, so we would actually put several rings. So for mic 1, we would put 1 ring of tape on the mic stand. For mic 2, we'd put 2 rings, 3 rings, so on and so forth, so we could identify them from the mixing board. But that's another thing you can do to make sure you're keeping things coordinated. Mark, I used that to drive a 5-volt lav into an XLR input with 48-volt phantom power on. Yes, that's great example, Mark. Perfect example of getting a 3.5 millimeter mic into an XLR input with that adapter. Victor, I was looking at FMR Audio RNC 1773. Ooh, stand by. Let's take a look at this. RNC. I haven't heard of FMR Audio in a long time. Let's see what they've got. Okay, so it's actually quite affordable. It looks like a half rack, or maybe, it's 3rd rack size. You've got your threshold, ratio, attack, release, and makeup gain. Yeah, it's got a bypass. It's got a super nice. What is super nice? Can't zoom in any more than that. It's a really nice compressor. That's what the RNC stands for. Shows you have meter here for gain reduction. This looks actually pretty good. I've never heard it, so I don't know what it sounds like, but
We have a testimonial.
we have a testimonial. Let's take a look. Great compressor from Matt Degnan. There you go. So that looks like a good option there. And affordable, too. Matt, well, it's February time for date night. Curtis Judd Audio and Danny, thank you so much, Matt. I appreciate that so much. Danny gives a thumbs up, too. Mark, I color code all cables and the connectors they plug into for quick setup. Great tip, Mark. If you are... One thing that I do is all my XLR cables come from a local pro audio shop, and they give you the option of color coding the connectors, so they can actually build that into the mic itself, to the connectors on the cable, itself. So if that's an option, that's one thing you might consider as well. So then you have color coding, and then makes it easy to identify. Matt says they also make an RNP, really nice preamp. So there's another option for you there.
Wait. Sorry.
Okay, here we go. Mark, make sure you check the connectors on the FMR RNC 1773. They are 1/4 inch. Good point. So they are balanced, but they're 1/4 inch. Okay. I think they're balanced. Double check that as well. Corey, anyone having the issue of Sennheiser SKP 100 G4 wireless plug-on transmitter not connecting with receivers? Another mixer with the same equipment had the same problem. Opened up circuit board, looks fine. I'll let the community address that. I have not had any issues like that. I don't own any of the G4s, but good to know. I wonder, what does Sennheiser support say as well, Corey? Be curious about that. All right, Robert says carry a B rig, which is a backup rig. As you upgrade various pieces of gear, build a B rig using your old gear. B rig means backup rig for location live work. Great advice, and completely agree. Yeah, so as you upgrade your mixer, keep your old mixer. That becomes your backup. Chuck also says batteries. I'm trying to standardize, have to fly, so I have small rig 99 Pro V mount and Deity batteries. The video on Core SWX Edge Snap was interesting. Thoughts on one to rule them all? Well, stay under 100 watt hours. That's the first thing, so you don't have any trouble when you get to the airport. I don't know. The Snap, I love the Snap. It's really cool. They're a little pricier than the others, and you have to get some. If you're going to be using the USB, you have to get some cables from them. Not necessarily a deal breaker. Just there's some expense there. But if I would rotate. In other words, I would buy the new batteries as you need them, as some of your existing batteries are starting to age. And I would just try some of them. So maybe buy one of the snaps and try it and see what your thoughts are. You might love it. It's only, I don't know if they've gotten anything larger than 45 watt hour capacity. So that's a downside potentially. Yeah, just lots of trade-offs. Sorry, I don't have a strong opinion on that. Thanks, community, for helping out a fellow sound mixer. And same from Victor. Thank you. All right, friends, it is time. Thank you all so much for joining our little community here today for our Sound for Video session. Get out there, make some great sound this week, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye.